Try this small experiment. Stop texting first, just for a few days. No, how are you? No, what are you doing? No check-ins? And watch what happens. For many people, something surprising appears almost immediately. The conversation disappears, not slowly, not gradually. It just stops. And that's when a quiet realization begins to form. You weren't really having conversations. You were carrying them. 1. When the pattern becomes visible. At first, most people don't notice this pattern. Being the one who texts first feels normal. You check in on friends. You ask about their day. You send a message when you remember something funny. It feels like kindness. It feels like connection. But over time, something subtle begins to emerge. You start noticing that if you don't send the first message, nothing happens. Days pass, sometimes weeks, and the silence begins to feel heavier than expected. Because silence has a strange psychological power. It forces us to see patterns we were previously ignoring. Suddenly, the relationship looks different. You start wondering, was I the only one maintaining this connection? That question is often the moment when people quietly decide to step back, not dramatically, not with anger, just quietly. They stop texting first, and psychology suggests this decision is rarely about ego. It's usually about emotional self-protection. 2. Why the brain takes silence so seriously. Human beings evolved as social creatures. For most of human history, survival depended on belonging to a group. Being accepted by others meant protection, food, safety. But being excluded from the group could be extremely dangerous. Because of this, the human brain developed a system that reacts strongly to social rejection. Modern neuroscience has shown that when people experience social exclusion, certain areas of the brain associated with distress become active. One of these areas is the anterior cingulate cortex. This region is also involved when the brain processes physical pain, which suggests something fascinating. The brain treats threats to social connection as something important enough to trigger a pain response. Not because rejection is literally a physical injury, but because throughout human evolution, losing connection with others could threaten survival. So when someone repeatedly feels ignored in conversations, their brain begins searching for ways to reduce that emotional discomfort. One simple strategy is avoidance, if reaching out creates disappointment. The brain learns to reduce that behavior, which means eventually a person stops texting first, not because they stopped caring, but because their brain is trying to protect them from repeated emotional discomfort. 3. The hidden cost of being the initiator. In many social groups, there is often one person who naturally becomes the initiator, the one who sends the first message, the one who organizes plans, the one who keeps conversations alive. These individuals often have a strong caregiving orientation. They value connection. They like making sure people feel included. In many ways, they become the emotional glue of their relationships. But there is a hidden cost to this role, because maintaining relationships requires emotional energy. And when one person carries most of that responsibility, the balance slowly disappears. At first, it may not feel unfair, but over time, something begins to shift internally. The effort that once felt generous begins to feel exhausting. Not because the person suddenly became selfish, but because humans are wired to expect at least some reciprocity in relationships. When effort flows only in one direction for long enough, the mind starts asking a quiet question. What would happen if I stopped trying for a while? And that small experiment often leads to a surprising answer. Sometimes, nothing happens at all. 4. The attachment system in the background. For some people, the reason goes even deeper. Our earliest relationships often shape how we approach connection later in life. Psychologists describe these patterns as attachment styles. Some people grow up learning that emotional closeness is safe and reliable. But others grow up experiencing emotional inconsistency. Their caregivers may have been distant, unpredictable, or emotionally unavailable. Over time, the brain adapts. It develops strategies to reduce emotional risk. One of these strategies is known as avoidant attachment. People with this pattern often value independence and emotional self-reliance. They still want relationships, but they are also highly sensitive to situations that might lead to rejection. So when a conversation starts feeling one-sided, their internal alarm system may activate. Instead of confronting the situation directly, they simply reduce vulnerability. They step back. They stop initiating. To others, this behavior might look cold or distant, but psychologically, it is often a protective response. The mind is trying to prevent a familiar emotional disappointment. 5. When feelings are hard to express. There is another reason some people gradually stop initiating conversations, and it has nothing to do with ego. For certain individuals, identifying and describing emotions can be surprisingly difficult. Psychologists refer to this tendency as alexithymia. People with this trait may feel emotions strongly, but translating those feelings into words can be challenging. So when something feels wrong in a relationship, they may struggle to explain it. They might want to say, "I feel ignored. I wish you reached out more. I feel like this connection is one-sided." But the words never quite come together. Instead, communication slowly fades. Messages become shorter, then less frequent. And eventually, silence replaces conversation, not because they don't care, but because expressing what they feel becomes emotionally overwhelming. 6. The quiet question behind the silence. In many cases, the real reason people stop texting first is surprisingly simple. They are observing their relationships. When someone stops initiating conversations, they're not necessarily trying to end the connection. They're asking a question, a quiet one. If I stop pushing this relationship forward, will it continue on its own? Sometimes the answer is yes. The other person reaches out. The balance returns, and the connection becomes stronger. But sometimes the silence continues, and that silence reveals something important. Some relationships only existed because one person was constantly keeping them alive. Realizing that truth can be painful, but it also provides something incredibly valuable: clarity. And clarity allows people to invest their energy into relationships where effort flows in both directions. I'm Garlic Man. If you've ever stopped texting first just to see what would happen, you're not alone. And if you enjoy exploring the hidden psychology behind everyday behavior, consider subscribing. There is always more to understand about the human mind.